All right, it's Wednesday night, 9 o'clock. It is time for another Sarcasm Delivered the live stream. This is Tim, first time hosting tonight. Regular panel member. God, I can't even speak tonight. Maybe the wrong night to have me host. Anyway, we got our panel of experts here. We have our meat expert. We've got Amos. Say hello, Amos.
Definitely the meat expert, I guess. That's a new
We
intro.
we got our wildlife expert, the annoyed minarchist Otter. Say hello. He's asleep. Okay. And then we got our expert anarchist here, Eric. Say hi, Eric.
I will say hello, and the baby might be saying hello while we're doing this.
All right, that's great. That's true anarchy there. And then teaching them early. There you go. And we have the expert pirate, I guess, with Mike. Mike, say hello to the world.
Hey, yo. Yeah, I guess we'll find out my specialty in times to come.
All right. So tonight we got a lot to cover. We're going to start off the night with our Florida elections. I'm down here in South Florida, and apparently we don't know how to count. Seems to be an ongoing problem down here. So I'm going to first just let everybody know where we're at right now with the Florida elections. We've got both sides in the Senate race throwing lawsuits back and forth with Rick Scott, the Republican, and Bill Nelson, the longtime Democrat who's been in D.C. for over 40 years. And the race is close. The votes are still not counted. There have been fraud, mishandling of ballots. They're all over the place. The deadline to have had the votes counted has come and gone, and it's been extended, and they're looking to extend it again. So I want to actually start off with Eric on this. What are your thoughts on the Florida election? And
Real quick,
I kind of know where you're going with this, but voting in general.
Real quick, Otter, mute yourself. There we go.
So, I can set aside the voting not being a legitimate practice or whatever other arguments you want to make for not voting to have the conversation. I don't know. I don't know why anybody's surprised that Broward County can't count. They've proven this repeatedly that they're terrible at it, and it sure seems like their elections coordinator and all the stuff that goes on down there is super sketchy and corrupt, and that they are obviously willing to break the rules regardless of what you think as far as finding votes and all the other crap. You just go, well, you had a deadline to count, you couldn't get them counted. You had an extension, you couldn't do that. You keep finding votes in places that weren't supposed to, like, they vote. How did the ballots ever end up there in the first place? So I think it's a gigantic cluster, and it's a perfect example of why voting is, if not immoral or, whatever other arguments you want to make, it's completely and totally ridiculous and a gigantic waste of time, because they're going to, even if it's just incompetence, they're going to screw it up.
Well, let me bring you back 18 years to the 2000 presidential election. Florida was famous for inventing the term hanging Chad and pregnant Chad because we had paper ballots at that time. And once again, Broward County was, the perpetrator of this debacle at that time. And here they are again. If they, in between then and now, you've had 9 elections because we do them every 2 years. So they haven't been able to get it right since. But let me throw a conspiracy theory out at you guys and get some feedback on this. The theory is this: the Republicans wanted to lose the House because they had more than 40 people retire since the presidential election in 2016. They only needed to lose, I think it was 23 seats in order for the Democrats to gain the majority in the House. So there were promises that have been made in the 2016 races and the 2016 election, and even prior to that, that they actually have, I believe, no intention of keeping. For instance, if we look at Obamacare, it started off with, once it was passed, the Republicans said, "We're going to repeal this. We're going to repeal this." Then that turned into repeal and replace, and repeal and replace turned into, well, the individual mandate, or we're just going to let it implode and fall apart. None of which is happening. Also, the border wall, which I've said from the beginning is not going to get built. I've said that from the beginning it's a stupid idea and it's never going to happen. But now, if you have the Democrats in control of the House, then you've got a semi-legitimate excuse that the Republicans can use for not getting the border wall built by saying, well, now the Democrats are blocking us and now we can't get this done. So I think partially the Republicans kind of threw some of these races in order to have a way out, a back door to say, well, this is why we can't get this done. It's all their fault. It's all their fault. And personally, I think that a lot of people would agree that when the government does nothing, it actually works out in our favor. But let me give you another example too. In Florida Congressional District 20, where I live, the Democrat that's been sitting in that seat for the last 20 years he ran unopposed. There wasn't or even a Republican on the ticket. So they just conceded that seat. So they figured, oh, let's just give this one up. And I'm wondering how many other races were just gimmies to the Democrats this go around, just so they can play this game and let this go a little bit longer. To say, oh, well, we can't do this and you're going to have to vote for us next time because next time we'll get them.
So that is very clearly the entire strategy of call them the ruling cabal, call them the ruling class, call them whatever you want to call them. That basically the two parties, there's a quote from Carol Quigley, who wrote this book, Tragedy and Hope. If you haven't read it, it's enlightening, if not a great read. And Carol Quigley was a guy that was like let in on all these meetings and stuff. And he wrote this book saying, hey, they do all this stuff in secret. And I really wish they wouldn't do it. So he was like pro all of the Rhodes Council and all this stuff. And his quote was that the two parties should be so closely aligned as to make no difference if they switch places, so that once in every few terms you can give the populace the ability to vote the rascals out. That's paraphrasing a direct quote from Quigley. And it's their stated objective. Not every congressman, not every senator, but enough of them and enough of the bureaucrats who run the parties understand that the concept is to placate the masses. And right. So, yeah, there's plenty of places where you look at it and go, just forget about the conspiracy stuff. Just look at gerrymandering. It's an open secret that Congress every so often redoes districts. And no matter who's in power, the districts are redone in favor of the incumbent party. Not necessarily the incumbent congressperson or senator. Well, senator's the state. So not necessarily just in favor of the incumbent congressperson, but in favor of the incumbent party in that district. Meaning districts that are traditionally Democrat will stay traditionally Democrat short of some major cultural change in that district. And so you look at a place like, I think it's Texas District 8, which is where I grew up, and it's Sheila Jackson Lee's district. And it is, go look at that on a map and tell me that thing isn't made to keep her in Congress. She's one of the dumbest human beings on the planet. She runs basically unopposed because nobody's going to win that district but her or whoever the next Democrat they put in that space is. And yeah, so it's not a conspiracy, and it's an open secret. It's there for people to look at. The problem is nobody's looking.
Well, yeah, I'll agree with you 100% on the gerrymandering because I live in a gerrymandered district. Once again, look at Florida Congressional District 20. Look at the map of this district. It is absolutely insane the way that the boundaries are drawn. And, our congressman, he's just look at Elsie Hastings in Wikipedia. And once you look at that, you can't tell me that this guy should be in Congress. So there's that. But like I said, if you actually look at the totality of what's gone on over the past couple of years, um, I I agree with you that it's not every single senator, it's not every single member of the House, but there's enough people there that are involved in the perpetuation of the government staying in a do a little here, do a little there, rather than get things done attitude, and to try to keep themselves in power and keep themselves in office and try to expand the reach of government more and more.
Sure. Understand that even if you don't want to assign ulterior nefarious motives, just look at the come along to get along kind of stuff that they do. I scratch your back, you scratch mine. The wheeling and dealing kind of lawyer stuff that goes on that everybody kind of expects and knows and understands. Like, you talk to the average voter and they go, yeah, of course they're wheeling and dealing, and like, that's the way things get done in Washington. You get that exact line from every voter you ever talk to, right? And so, like, you don't have to. It doesn't have to be conspiracy theory. It doesn't have to be, skull and bones and whatever. It doesn't have to be the John Birch Society's perspective on the UN and stuff. It can just be, look at what they're doing openly. Just look at the stuff they tell you about, and you will understand that they're in it for them. And there's this what is it? The iron law of bureaucracy. I can't remember whose rule this is, but basically that in any organization, as it reaches scale, you get the 10 to 20% of the organization that is true to the original mission of the organization, and the rest of the bureaucrats become true to the organization in its own, for its own sake. And that's what you've got. And it doesn't matter which party it is. Left wing, right wing, same drone. The missiles are coming. It doesn't matter which side it is, or if you prefer, left boot, right boot, doesn't matter which one's on your neck. It doesn't take a genius or conspiracy theory to figure out that, that's how everything works. That's how human nature works. It's I'm going to do what's best for me, and if I'm a congressman, what's best for me is to go along to get along and play the games, because when I'm done, I'm either going to get some big time corporate gig, or I'm going to get a board seat somewhere, or I'm going to get a lobbying job on K Street, and I'm going to be set for life. None of these guys, even the one-termers, are set for life. Even the one-term congressmen, 2 years, make millions after they leave Congress. You don't have to be a lifer to be set forever doing this thing. So it's obviously in the interest of the people that get elected to perpetuate the system, regardless of what that actually means in practice.
Right. Okay. So thank you, Eric. The other three of you have been kind of silent. Anybody else want to chime in on our great Florida elections?
Yeah, I saw an interesting quote the other day, and I don't think I should have to remind the audience, but this is not an endorsement of the person I'm quoting. Joseph Stalin said, "It's not who you vote for, it's who counts the votes, because simply the illusion of having an election is enough for the population." And the other point I wanted to make, a little bit back, you were talking about how both sides come in oh well, now they're blocking this side, now they're blocking this side, and it just becomes a big wall of excuses. There was actually a South Park joke on this, and Cartman went back in time to 1776 to figure out what was going on during the Founding Fathers. Make a long story short, they said oh well, we'll have it this way. That way we can go to war with the country and then act like we didn't want to the whole time. It's called taking your cake, having your cake and eating it too.
Well, yeah, let's look at, if you look at the first 2 years of Obama's presidency, they didn't touch immigration whatsoever. but immigration has been an issue that the Democrats keep pushing every single year since. Whereas they had 2 years, they could have done practically anything they wanted to do. They didn't touch it. So it becomes this hot button issue which they can say, oh, yes, Democrats are for open borders, Republicans, they want a wall now. And this goes back and forth. But once again, the Republicans have had both the House and the Senate for the last 2 years, along with the White House, and they've done nothing on this issue. They've talked about a wall. They could have funded the wall if they really wanted to, but they didn't. Another issue that they keep touching on is Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood is one of those issues where they say, well, we're going to defund this, but then they go ahead and fund it anyway. And it's this same cycle that we go through over and over and over again of we're going to do all these great things when we show up in Washington, send us to Washington. Well, you're there, and then what do? A whole lot of nothing. And then I'm not saying that I want them to do so much more than what they're doing. Honestly, I wish the government would just shut down and they would just leave us all the hell alone. But the thing is that they dupe people into believing that they're going to drain the swamp. Well, the swamp is still there. They're going to build the wall, build the wall. There is no wall. And then you have these people that just convince the populace that they're going to do all these great things, and these great things never happen. And the new thing is this push for Medicare for all. And we've discussed this before, and I'm going to tell you again, it's a horrible idea. But now we've got, this Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, our new Democrat socialist from New York, newly elected and on her way to D.C. Well, she doesn't have any rent money, apparently, where she can't afford to get an apartment in D.C. It just came out today that she had to have a financial disclosure, and it shows that she's got over $15,000 sitting in the bank, but she doesn't have any money for an apartment. I don't know about you guys, but if I had $15,000 sitting in the bank and I had to move somewhere, I could find an apartment for that and be able to live for 3 months off of that.
Oh, definitely. And honestly, on that, I think it's kind of like a big guise. Like, she's wearing like $1,000,000, $1,000, outfits, whatever it is, and you're expecting us to believe that she can't afford a place to live. I think this is 100% just smoke and mirrors and guaranteeing her reelection, because now everyone's like, oh, she's just like us. She's trying to make ends meet. She can't afford to move to the new city to start her new job.
Well, here's the thing. You've elected someone to go to Washington to be part of the federal government who is going to be setting policy and voting on policy in order to spend your money. She is not able to handle her own personal finances. So why would you think that she handle your money better than you can if she can't even budget for herself?
Wait, that assumes two things. First, that having $15,000 in the bank isn't managing your finances appropriately, which is wrong. And second, that this isn't all a ruse, right? This is, and Mike mentioned this, but I don't know that he's 100% correct about this. But this is her playing her part, right? She's of the people. She's for the working class. Like, you have to make that argument, and she has to play that up at all points. So she's saying, hey, this system isn't designed for people who don't have any money to lead. My answer to that question is, yeah, no, yes, obviously, that's the point. Like, if you're going to have leaders, do you really want a bunch of broke former waitresses being the leaders? The answer is absolutely freaking not. So,
well, see here, let me stop you there for a second. The House of Representatives was set up, so in theory, was set up for people to go there for 2 years, and it was supposed to be a representative of the people. So if this was for the average person, the business owner, the farmer, whoever it was able to leave their business for 2 years, and that's why the term is so short, for them to go to Washington, do what they needed to do, and then go home and resume their life. So the
but think about who
is
could
actually
afford
for
to
the
do that
average
for 2
person.
years. Think about who could afford to do that for 2 years, and then on top of that, understand that there was no salary when the country was founded.
It was also never intended to be a 24/7 government. They were supposed to go there and be called in whenever there were
and they
things
still
that
don't.
needed attended to.
And they're also raising kids in their own
stuff,
area.
budget planning sessions, etc., and then go home.
Exactly. So this was supposed to be a part-time gig for 2 years. So the way it is now, what it's morphed into, and this is what I'm saying. I mean, to have somebody that, what is she, 27? To have somebody at 27 years old to have $15,000 in the bank, and that honestly, I got to give her credit for that. That's a good thing. So handling her finances to the point where she's able to save $15,000 and have that much money in the bank, that's kudos for that. And now, Eric, I'm taking this on the way it's presented, not in the way it's perceived. Now, if you're telling me that you have $15,000 sitting in the bank and you can't get an apartment and be able to feed yourself for a couple of months before you start getting your government paycheck, then that tells me that you are not very good with money. That tells me that your budgeting is horrible, because if it's going to take you more than $15,000 in 3 months, then there is something severely wrong with your budgeting.
Yeah, I got in an argument with somebody on Twitter yesterday or today about this, and it got like zero traction, which is fine. But the point that the person I got in the argument with was, so you're expecting her to spend all her savings? And my answer was, yes, you ran for office and you won 5 months ago. When you won the primary, you knew you were going to win because no Republican was going to beat her. It was never going to happen in that district. Back to the gerrymandering thing, right? So, yes, you made a conscious choice to run for office, and you won 5 months ago, and you've got $15,000 in the bank. Yes, I absolutely expect you to not bitch and moan about the fact that you can't afford rent in Washington, D.C. And oh, by the way, as part of this argument, I went and looked. The rent in her district and the rent in D.C. near the Capitol and near the congressional office buildings is roughly the same on average. So you can't tell me she can't, especially as a new incoming congressman going, hey, a lot of those guys are going, hey, I got to maintain my lifestyle back home and a lot of those guys live in their offices and whatever else. You can't tell me you can't find some roommates and share the costs and make it work. And you've only got to make it work for 2 months. You got to make it work until January 20th, and then you start making $147,000 a year, and you can pay yourself back.
No, it's 174.
Okay, yeah, fine. It's $174,000 a year, which, by the way, is 3 times as much money as my wife and I make combined. And we make it work just fine with the baby. Like, bite me.
And also, another thing is, and things people don't really think about is, like, it's almost like the Army where it's like everything is set up for you. You're not spending a dime on food. Like, everything's basically paid for. I happened to be a caterer at one time, and, they catered for, like, this big government meeting. The governor was there and, like, all these representatives and shit. And, you have, like, all these people, like, making all this money and all the money to, put into the event. All probably paid by taxpayer money, mind you. And these guys just show up, eat, like, a bite of what's made, and then leave.
So that's true once she takes office, right? She can eat in the congressional dining rooms for free and all that stuff. The issue is the gap. She's saying she needs to move to D.C. now for, like, new congressman orientation and all the stuff that happens before the actual inauguration, which is fine. She's got to go, hit the phones and start fundraising immediately, because if you don't think your politicians are bought and paid for, just go look at that.
And at that point, it's only like a month, right?
Well, it's like 8 weeks. It's like 2 months if she and that doesn't count, like, Thanksgiving holidays next week, and then there's the Christmas and New Year's holiday and whatever. So that's all well and good. It's free, like, everything's basically handled, and she's got a big paycheck coming in like 2 months. You can't tell me if she really, really, really doesn't want to spend her $15,000 on that, You can't tell me there's not some bank somewhere willing to write her a personal loan on a $174,000 guaranteed job coming. That she's been elected. It's real easy to prove, hey, I got this money coming. It's a government paycheck. And so, like, it's a total non-issue. It's total and complete BS. It's just there for the hit pieces and the drive-by. Oh, so sad, she can't afford to blah blah. It's total garbage. It's total and complete garbage. It's a total non-issue.
You know what she needs to do? She needs to sign up for welfare.
Well, she's going on welfare starting January 20th. High-end,
exactly.
top of the line welfare. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But the bigger point for me is also there's nothing stopping her from crowdfunding that money. She can't use campaign funds, but there's no reason she can't raise money personally to pay for those expenses.
I already checked it out. If you go on GoFundMe right now, there are at least a half a dozen GoFundMe pages set up in order to raise money for her to go to DC.
Yeah, of course there is.
And people are into this, which is just adds to the insanity of it all.
Yeah, I just like crowdfunding. Like I'm good with crowdfunding. Like I think it's okay, cool. Fund it that way. By the way, anarchists, right? Voluntary funding, beautiful. Like if you guys want to send your money to help her, who she does not need the help, but if you've got the extra cash and you want to send her a couple of dollars, more power to you.
But without government, who would help the needy?
Exactly. I got in that argument with somebody. I was like, what kind of an asshole would you have to be that your kid, the argument was like, what if your kid had some sort of curable but terminal disease? Like you're going to die if you don't get treatment, but it's totally curable and you don't have insurance. I'm like, what kind of an asshole do you have to be that nobody would help you in that scenario?
Well, you're absolutely right. So that leads me on to our next topic of who would help the needy. In Kansas City this past week, there were people that were trying to feed the homeless, and the government there decides, oh, no, we can't tell if that food is safe or not. So they poured bleach all over the food, and they bleached the food so that these people could not give out this perfectly good food to homeless people.
We need an Elon Musk signal.
No. This whole thing makes me so mad. But here's the piece that makes me the most mad about it. You ready?
Go ahead.
Austin Peterson tweeted out about this. Austin Peterson, who ran for Republican Senate candidate in Missouri, who was a major candidate for the LP presidential nomination 3 years ago. How much you want to bet if Austin would quit trying to run and lose national level elections, he could win a city council or mayor seat in Kansas City where he lives, and he could, actually do something about this problem other than tweeting about it. That pisses me off.
There you go. I'll agree with you there.
He's kind of a go big or go home kind of guy, I guess.
Yeah, but here's another thing to consider is that there are cities across the United States right now where it is illegal to sleep on a sidewalk. It is illegal to feed homeless people. In parts of South Florida, it is illegal to give money to panhandlers. So you can't even, walk up to, somebody that's homeless and hand them $1 because that's illegal. Personally, I don't hand homeless people money. I actually go out and buy them food. My wife and I do this pretty regularly. We'll stop at a restaurant, like a fast food restaurant, when we see somebody that's homeless. We'll bring them food. We do this more often than you might think. When we see people that are actually homeless, that are walking around with like a shopping cart with all their belongings in it, we will stop and give those people money because it's just the right thing to do. And we're not the wealthiest people around, but if we have a little bit more than they do, then we're willing to give. And it's shocking that behavior, just basic human kindness, is now considered illegal by local governments. To me, the insanity of this is just beyond comprehension.
I understand the not giving them money part of it.
Well, yeah,
I understand the rationale, right? You don't.
Yeah,
wanna,
I understand. I understand that.
but the
But
no food thing is that's. I mean,
it's insane.
well, I don't. Yeah, I don't like using moral arguments if I can avoid it, but that's pretty evil.
Oh yeah, I
Right.
agree with you
Yeah,
100%.
that's straight up heinous. And yeah, you never give up money because you know what they're doing with the money. And more often than not, if you offer food, they're not going to take it. They want the money or nothing.
I've never had somebody not take the food.
I've
I,
had
I have. I ha-
I've had that happen one time, and the guy that refused the food. I honestly I see this guy every day, and what he told me was he gets a check every month from the government, and he can afford to buy food, but he doesn't have enough money to buy himself a place to live. So he has enough food. He opened up the cooler and showed me. He says, "Look, I just don't have a place to live." And so he refused the food that I had for him, and there was just nothing more I could do. And someone like that, I actually have respect for people like that. That he said, "Look, I'm doing what I can for myself, but I just can't do everything." And I have respect for people like that. But when it comes to some people that that they're going to take that $5 that you gave them, and they're going to buy some type of a substance that they shouldn't be putting in their body in the first place. Those are the people I completely understand that we shouldn't be giving anything to, because
yeah.
your money's doing harm and it's not doing any good. And those
Money. You can
people,
give those people food.
right,
You
Absolutely.
shouldn't
And
be
that,
giving them
and that,
money.
right, and those
and
are the
what you,
people that are going to refuse your food.
yeah, and what you said, that's understandable. He doesn't want to take food that can be given to someone else. That's actually more selfless than selfish. I'm talking about, I'd get someone asking for money to get a plate of food or whatever. I'm like, come on, let's go to McDonald's. Like, I'm going to McDonald's right now. Grab your burger. Like, oh no, no, I'm all set. I just need the money. Like,
Yeah, so I've not had anybody refuse food, but I have had grifters try to pull that crap trying to get gas. Oh, I need
Oh
$5 for
yeah.
gas at the gas station. I'm like, where are you parked at? Where's your car? Like, let's get it up to the gas station. Or I like until I wrecked my truck a couple months ago. Like, I always had a gas can in the truck, so it was like even if they weren't parked at the pump, I'm like, well, I'll grab my gas can and we can go fill it up right now. And that I get told no a lot. In fact, I think I've only ever had one person actually take the gas. They were like parked at the pump. They were actually trying to get gas. I've only ever had that happen once. So I've seen that grift a lot.
Yeah, I'm not really up for the dishonest people. Those people piss me off.
Mhm.
So anyway, Otter, are you still there?
Yeah. I
Okay,
had to
great.
check in to unload here. That's why I was muted for so long. Yeah, I've had a lot of homeless people as a truck driver, OTR for years. I've had a lot of them come up, try things. Some of them I've been dumb enough to fall for when I was new and naive, and some of them I'll reach into the cooler and grab everyone knows what a P3 pack is or a Lunchable or something. Back before I was on a diet, and they're like, "Oh, no, hey, you're a truck driver. You make tons of money." I was like, "Oh yeah, right." No, and yeah, they all think we're like just loaded. I'm like, no. So
See,
anyway,
years ago, I had a family friend who was about to become homeless. He was basically he was dying of AIDS. Didn't have long to live. Had no way to pay his rent, and so I moved him in with me, and said, "Look, you're turning gray anyway. You look like you're on death's door. Yeah, I can't have you living on the street. So come live with me." And for the last year or so of his life, he spent with me and my wife at the time, because I just couldn't see that happening to somebody. And when when I hear people say that you have to have the government step in because who else is going to do these things? Who else is going to help people? It pisses me off because I've literally taken people into my home more than once that were about to be homeless. I like I said, my wife and I we're charitable people. You know, we'll help out people. My wife saw that there was somebody that was part of one of these these DM groups I have on Twitter who is talking about how he was on the verge of being homeless, and she said, "I want to send him money." I said, "You don't even know this guy." She said, "I don't care." It's like it breaks my heart to see something like this happen, and so people like her, people like my wife, that will just see somebody in need and will just open up her purse and scrounge around to see if she has a dollar and pull out whatever cash she has and just hand it to them without thinking. Those are the type of people that I guarantee you are infectious to others, that without the government being there to act as a nanny state will be the people that will inspire others to make sure that that person that you think isn't going to survive without a government handout will be able to survive because of people like her. And that's why I'm a firm believer that you don't need some magical entity that is sitting in DC deciding that all of a sudden we need Medicare for all or universal basic income, which is just pure garbage, because their charity is much, much, much better handled when it's direct person to person or on a local community level. So
Well,
when
and
I see things like
understand,
what happened in Kansas City, that just infuriates me
yeah, because
because
understand
it's
what that
not.
because understand what that is. That's people literally doing the thing that we get asked all the time. Who will do that if the government doesn't do it? And the government came in and said, not only can we not do this effectively enough, we're not going to let you do that because it makes us look bad.
Well, here's the thing that pisses me off even more about what happened in Kansas City is that it's not as if the government said, "Oh no, we're already taking care of these people. We don't need your help." They said, "No, you can't help those people. We're going to stop you from doing it, and we're not going to help them either."
Exactly. That's exactly my point. Is this is not only is this not the best case scenario that we get, like especially anarchists, but libertarians and anarcho-capitalists get this all the time of, well, who will take care of the poor people if the government's not there to do it? Okay, these people, on top of the fact that these people are ostensibly paying taxes and whatever else, are still charitable enough to go do this. Your ostensibly kind government, who is in your theoretical argument doing this already, not only is not doing this, is actively stopping people who would do this regardless from doing what you think they wouldn't do.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also happened in California. There's actually videos online. You can see where people are being arrested when they're trying to feed homeless people there. And it's the insanity here is just reaching new levels. And then, let's talk about California a little bit as well. Is that California has these wildfires that have burnt what is it, over 8,000 structures. Almost 50 people have lost their lives, and these fires are raging on there in California. Trump decides to tweet out that it's the mismanagement of their government there that are not handling their forests properly, and that's why they have these wildfires that are raging.
He's
But the
not
truth of
wrong.
the matter is that he's not 100% wrong. Um, there's underbrush that should have been cleared out that wasn't cleared out. They've had wildfires in California for what, in the entirety of the time that it's been a state, and so they should know that they need to manage this better, and just don't.
So my mom grew up in California, and my grandfather explained this crap to me 25 years ago. That the reason they have wildfires in California is that sometime in the late 60s, they put a ban on controlled burns. And so they don't do the little controlled brush clearing burns anymore the way most other states that have fire problems have. Like in Texas, we don't have big forests like they have, but we get grass fires. And so you'll see on the side of the highway and stuff where they'll go in and they'll burn fire breaks so that if a fire does start, it doesn't spread too far. They don't do any of that anymore in California. And it's not just the California state people, it's also the national forests in California aren't managed that way either. And so, yeah, I mean, I was having a conversation with somebody I know who grew up in California and I think is still living there. And they said the exact same thing. Like, yeah, anybody that lives here knows that that is exactly the case. And it's not like anybody who's been paying attention hasn't known this for forever. Like I said, my grandfather explained that to me 25 years ago. And nothing's changed.
Are we going to mention that Kanye hired private firefighters?
How awesome was that? How awesome is Kanye and Kim, like, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, they're going, oh, prison reform and saving people's lives and paying for, like, private fire. Like, where did that come from?
Well, here's a little statistic most people don't know is that I think it's 67 or 69% of the firefighters in the United States are volunteer firefighters.
Right. Oh, I make that argument all the time with people who are like, oh, you want people's houses to burn. I'm like, you do realize the vast majority of both fire and EMS services in the U.S. are privately funded. They're not my brother-in-law is a firefighter. Like, most places, and on top of that, most places in major cities, like my brother-in-law is a firefighter in a massive city, and the city has regulations on private stuff, but in the suburbs, like the outside of the city proper in the metro area, it's all private, all of it.
Well, see, I live in South Florida. In South Florida, most of the EMS here um, are private companies, and so you've got quite a few of these private companies that come and they will pick you up when you dial 911. They'll bring you to the hospital. You're going to get a bill, and the thing is that they are looking at the response times in a different way than the public funded are. Because if, for instance, a public funded EMS shows up at your house in 12 or 14 minutes, opposed to a private funded that shows up at your house in 8 minutes, then the contract for that service is being reviewed by the city that's managing it or the county that's managing it, and they want to do the best possible job that they can so they can keep that contract. And so they're going to have competitors that are going to say, hey, look, we're in the next town over and we're responding to calls within 6 minutes, and your current contract is at 8 minutes, so we can do better and we want this contract. So there's actually incentive here for these private companies to get to you faster and have a more positive result and give you better care, because they are going to use those statistics now to try to compete for business in other cities and towns as they try to expand. Whereas your publicly funded, do whatever we want organizations, there's nothing you can do about. You're stuck with them. And when you have no competition, and this is what people don't understand, is that when you have no competition within a market, then there is no incentive to do any better. There is no incentive to innovate. There is no incentive to be more efficient. There is no incentive to make things better, because all you have is status quo and nothing needs to change.
Well, I actually think most people understand that kind of intuitively. The thing that they have the cognitive dissonance about is, how do people pay for the thing that they need when they need it, regardless of whether or not they can pay for it. It's not that competition isn't like good in most places. Most people look at EMS services and go, oh my God, like if you need an ambulance and you can't afford it, what are you going to do? And like, I had an ambulance ride. It was 3.6 miles and it was $1,000.
Wow,
Right?
yours is a lot more expensive than mine was.
Yeah.
I
Yours
had,
is private. Mine's not.
yeah.
That's the point.
Well, there you go.
It's
Yeah,
actually
because
more expensive. The public funding, even though it's partial funding, the public funding is more expensive to the person who needs that service, regardless of whether or not they can pay for it, than the private services would be, because they have competition. They got to keep prices down. So it's not just more efficient, better service. It's also cheaper. That was the point. You walked right into it.
well,
Well,
yeah, there you go.
here's the
Well,
thing. They systematically drive these prices up for these public entities, and then you have people saying, "Well, I can't pay a $2,000 ambulance bill, so I need government to pay for insurance to actually pay for it." Not really thinking the resources that actually go into it. I mean, obviously it's a little bit more than the cab ride,
Somebody's
but
paying for it somewhere. Somebody's
right,
like, regardless of how far down the line you want to kick that can, somebody's paying for it. And oh, by the way, the more people whose hands that money has to go through, the more the final bill ends up being.
yeah. But people just don't think about actual resources and time spent and like what you're putting into it than what you're getting out of it. They just see the number that's presented in front of them. It's kind of like going to a mechanic and you don't know anything about cars, so all you're gonna know is what bill he gives you. He can give you a $2,000 bill, even though you only had a $15 repair.
yeah, exactly. And what people don't understand when it comes to anything in healthcare is that not only are you paying for the services that you receive, but in some cases you still are paying for the services that you might need at that time. For like an example is your ambulance ride. When you took an ambulance ride for 3 miles, when I had mine is after I had my heart attack, I had to be transferred from one hospital to another because I had to get to a cath lab. And so not only are you just paying for the trip there, but you're paying for those two paramedics or however many that are sitting next to you that entire ride, just in case you need them during that ride.
You're also subsidizing the cost of the people who really, really can't afford it and don't pay their bills.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the other piece of socializing that whole thing is like, hey, by the way, private companies do that more effectively because they're cheaper, so the bills get paid more often.
Right.
It all goes together. That's the piece most people miss is that everybody's gonna get paid somehow, and if what happens if poor people just can't pay it, then the price for everybody else goes up. That's how businesses adjust, or they go out of business and somebody else will find a better way to do it.
Yep, and also a glimmer of hope. The last time I went to a hospital, which was like a couple of months ago now, I actually saw a little space for Ubers to pick up and drop off. Ubers and Lyfts.
I've seen a number of articles about how people, I'm pretty sure in New York, have started using Uber instead of the ambulance to get to the ER. Not only because it's cheaper, but because it's substantially faster. And so, if it's not something where you're bleeding out and you need an ambulance to like stitch you up on the site, they're calling Uber to like get to the ER because you'll actually get there in a reasonable amount of time at a reasonable price.
Yeah, yeah. I think we can do healthcare on another stream entirely because there's so much involved in that, and so I think we need to table that until that time. But getting back to California, though, I wanted to mention that as you said that they've changed their policy so they don't do any of this this pre-brush clearing and burning. Now, there's a shooting that happens anywhere in the country, and immediately they call for government interaction and government gun control. Now, when you look at California, you've got almost 50 people that have died because of this fire. I don't see anybody on the news, on social media, in print, online, calling for a change in regulations in order to allow for this clearing and this brush burning. So you have almost 50 people that have died, which is almost three times as much as the number of the people that died in Stoneman Douglas, the school shooting that happened on Valentine's Day this year here in South Florida, where we had sweeping regulations that changed in this state, and they just upped my property tax in order to put a police officer on every school campus in the county. And in California, you had three times as many people die because of a fire, and I don't see a single person out there protesting saying we've got to change our forestry laws so we can save lives.
Yeah, and on the whole gun regulation thing, actually recently in my town, there was a bullet found in a middle school, like in the hallway of a middle school, and basically they shut the whole school down, and everyone's freaking out, and everyone's clamoring for police presence, and all these precautions and stuff. And it's like these are kids that are like 8 and 12 years old. Someone probably found a stray bullet in the grass. I mean, it's Massachusetts. There aren't really many guns around, anyways, and just like dropped it in school, and people are like calling for alarm because of all the things that are going on.
Well, see here, this is where I think that Larry Sharp had such a great idea, is that you should allow any teacher who wants to carry, but just don't announce who's carrying.
Yep.
So that way, if the shooter shows up at the school, they don't know who has a gun and who doesn't. So they're
absolutely.
likely to actually go into a school or a classroom because they don't have these soft targets. You get rid of these no gun zones and these gun free zones, and it completely changes the dynamic. Because I think the statistic is that since gun free zones were implemented, 97% of mass shootings have occurred within gun free zones.
Yep. And actually, thank you for reminding me because I kind of forgot the second part of my point there. Come to find out when I'm talking to people about all this is there's actually 6 veterans currently working at that school, and it's a small school. It's probably got a staff, probably about 30. 6 of them are veterans. Like, just process that.
That's just insane. So anyway, the last thing I wanted to touch on tonight, and since we're in the talking about people that are dying, is Stan the Man Lee passed away this week. He was 95 years old. This is a guy who has had an influence on most of America in one way, shape, or form through the just plethora of comic book characters and stories that he created that are now part of just every aspect of media, whether it be the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the MCU, whether it be TV shows from Saturday morning cartoons to live action shows that are on Netflix or on ABC. Marvel is now part of Disney, and so having a loss of someone of that significance at this time is just kind of tragic. And just wanted to go around and each one of you guys, if you have a favorite comic book character, just let me know or let the world know. And what are your thoughts on Stan Lee?
What a life, huh?
I was never huge into comic books, but I always liked the Fantastic Four, the Human Torch. He was pretty badass.
Well, it's kind of interesting because Stanley actually resurrected that character. The original Human Torch was part of the golden age of comics, and he was an android. And Stan Lee decided to use that same formula for that character and recreate it into Johnny Storm, part of the Fantastic Four.
Interesting.
So, Amos, any thoughts?
If you recall, it's actually I remember back in when he first created Captain America, I saw a documentary where Stan Lee basically, in what was the comic book that he was working, I don't think it was called Marvel yet when he created Captain America, but being that Captain America was known for not just as a superhero, but also sort of a propaganda device of fighting Hitler, which is something I could, go for. But yeah, I remember there was something about how once he released, once that comic sort of started getting popular, the office building where they were drawing these comics apparently was crowded by American Nazis at the time. And as a result, they had to basically navigate the crowd and get out. Like, he was facing a lot of pressure for a lot of his views. I mean, did you guys read the piece he wrote about racism and bigotry in America?
No, I didn't see that.
There's a piece that was being like, I mean, a lot of leftists are trying to kind of claim him like he was some SJW, like one of them. But he, if anything, was like just he was the right kind of progressive. So he kind of used his comics to, what people thought was so relatable about his comics was his comic book characters were actually people with real issues. Whereas you had people like Superman and Batman that had stories, but had so much power and influence behind them that they didn't seem relatable. Well, Spider-Man was more relatable than Batman or Superman.
Well, that's one thing that Stan Lee wanted to do is when he created Spider-Man, he wanted Spider-Man to be a teenager because he wanted to be relatable. And that's also what he did with the X-Men. When he created the X-Men, he wanted them to be teenagers because he understood that teenagers were the ones that were reading the comics at the time. Yeah, and so he wanted them to be characters that people could relate to.
But even nowadays, the live action adaptations of these characters, the Marvel characters tend to be, I believe, to be a whole lot more relatable and sort of down to earth. They definitely have their levels of cosmic levels of powers that kind of set them apart, but it's not to the point of like DC, where if you looked at the sort of the scales of DC Comics and what kind of things these characters would do. I mean, both universes had their sort of approaching infinity, just ridiculous feats, but DC would make their characters very unrelatable. I mean, could you relate with an alien with superpowers living on Earth?
Right. That's who I am.
Well, I think it's all allegorical. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, because you guys are the experts. Wasn't X-Men kind of like a civil rights thing as well?
Yeah.
It had some.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, exactly. And also, I don't know if you guys know this or not, but in the late 60s and early 70s, Stan Lee did a lot of personal appearances. And he did a lot of appearances at college campuses where he would go out and he would talk to students about the X-Men and about comics at the time and about how those characters resonated with the people that were there. So he was kind of like a college celebrity at the time. And he's also the one, I believe, that started the letters page at the back of comics, where people used to write into their, these comic book publishers, and he started printing letters and responding to them on the back page of comics. So not only did he make the comic book characters relatable, but he tried to make comic books a little bit more personal. So, you're a 12, 13-year-old kid and you're reading Spider-Man and you really like the issue and you decide, I want to write to Stan Lee. There's a possibility that Stan Lee might actually publish your letter in a comic and respond to you within the comic. So, I mean, he made it more personal than it had ever been before. So he completely changed the way that people viewed comics at the time. And, through creating relatable characters and through doing these things, by putting a human face to it, he actually changed the industry. And, there never has been anybody else like him, and I don't know if anybody else will be able to even come close to filling that gap that he's left.
Right. And like I said, I'm not hugely into comic books, but he was just such a bold character, and like you said, he was a college campus celebrity. I mean, he was just an all around great guy. Like
Yeah,
you could like see his aura from miles away.
that's one thing you gotta give it to him, though. I mean, Stan Lee just presented himself as a very down to earth, very likable guy. So, with that being said, and it looks like our time's about up, and the other four likable guys that are on this panel tonight, I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight with Amos, our meat expert, our annoyed minarchist Otter, our real anarchist Eric, and Mike the Happy Pirate. And as always, we wish you life, liberty, and the pursuit of sarcasm. Good night, everyone.
Night.